So this week we've got this felt road bike here, and the customer was not happy with the matte carbon and wanted to lacquer the bike. This is effectively painting the bike, and this is a little video on how we prepare a bike for paint for customers. We do this quite regularly where we strip a bike right down, customer goes away, gets it painted, and then comes back to us and we rebuild it. So there's a few tips and tricks that you might pick up along the way here if you're choosing to do this. And first of all, obviously we have to strip the bike down. So we try and save cables and things that we can, but ultimately you have to replace some cables. Fortunately for us, this was an external routed bike. Externally routed cables are actually brilliant for your everyday bike. You know, the bike that you want to be using all the time. They're so much more serviceable than internal routed bikes. So for this bike we managed to save the brake cables and reuse them, but we did replace the gear cables because they're so easy to fit, and it just made sense really, far easier just to cut them out and replace them. So we're stripping the bike down now. As you can see, we're taking off the group set. We replace all the little bolts and the little nooks and crannies and odds and ends we keep together in a box ready for when the bike comes back to us. The wheels are all put in a stand, and you know, you keep everything in a set order nicely so that it's all ready to go back on. We clean all the parts off while the bike's away, so as everything's spotless when it goes back on, and then the customer gets effectively back a freshly painted, new feeling bike, so it's always a nice experience for them. So we're removing the chain protector here. We heated this up, it's stuck on, and then used a piece of string to cut that off so we can reuse it. So we'll replace the sticky on that and place it onto the bike. So the next thing, once you've stripped everything off, is you'll notice now that I start to replace everything with old fittings, so that you never know how good or bad your painter is. Some painters will literally rub the whole bike down, just paint over everything in all the threads, the whole lot will come back painted, and it makes it an awful lot harder to rebuild the bike. So we put bearing cups in, nuts and bolts where old fittings were, so that the bike doesn't get painted in all them threads that you want to save and keep nice. So we're now just stripping back the forks, taking out all the bearings. These are all the little fittings that all the cables go on along the bike. This bike was lent itself to this really because all these little fittings weren't sort of bonded to the carbon. They were fitted after the bike had been produced, so like all these little plastic things and all come off nicely, makes it very easy. And these little fittings here, these were right under the frame. Again, we just put a couple of little bolts in there just to make sure the threads don't get anything in them. Cable guides. Yeah, this bike really did strip down. For painting, this bike was the perfect candidate. Next up, we just mark the seat post so that we know what height to put it when we come to rebuilding. And we're almost at the point now where this main frame is ready to go. We wipe down the grease off the forks, and you're like sort of preaching to the preaching to the preached really, but I always just put little notes on parts just so that the painter knows, you know, don't paint this, it's just not necessary and would make our job harder. So there we go, that's the frame absolutely ready to go, and we've now received it back, and the first thing we do is prep the seat post so that we can really avoid any possibility of any damage to this frame after it's been painted. So first thing we do is put in the seat post, ready to clamp it up in the stand for the rebuild. And basically he's had that matte carbon lacquered, and I think it was a vast improvement on this bike. I think it looked lovely when it was done. I've always liked gloss bikes, I've never liked matte bikes, and yeah, it looked lovely after it was finished. So if you're not a subscriber, please do subscribe to the channel. You know, we're working hard to build this channel, and it's always nice when we see new subscribers. Please like the videos, share the videos, even comment on the videos. It just tells us you're out there, and it gives us some positive feedback and some positive energy. We've got some great videos coming out in the next few weeks, and I hope you'll enjoy those as they come. Yeah, we just like to do our sort of once a week video at the moment to show you what we get up to here at Bikespeeds. So now we're rebuilding this bike. So basically we like to get the forks on the bike as soon as possible so that there's no risk of any damage to those after they're fitted. So we've greased up all the bearings, we've got those back in the frame, on go the handlebars, and then we just put a little support there to stop them swinging around and damaging any of that paint, and line up that felt logo on the bearing cap. So at this stage we've roughly lined up the handlebars. We need the wheels in and the bike on the ground to correctly line those up, so we won't torque those stem bolts until everything's lined up. So next up we get in the brakes, and then it's just a case of methodically rebuilding now. So we're reuse these cables, so they're hanging down, so they're the first ones to go back on again, so it avoids any risk of any damage to the bike. So we get that front wheel in, align that brake, then the cable back in, and everything's set up. It's actually quite nice really to strip a bike down and rebuild it, because it's like resetting everything, you know, everything that's moved or worn or not quite right. By doing this, you're getting that bike back absolutely 100%. You know, they often come back better than they would have left the shop or the factory that you brought them from, because it's such a meticulous process and we're so careful with it. So next up, I actually removed the entire hanger, not just the derailleur. I took the entire hanger off the frame because again it was being painted, so it was just a case of putting the hanger back on really, which had the derailleur already set. Yeah, we sort of did the front end, then the back end, then the middle and drivetrain, so that's what we're doing now. Getting the rear brake on, little fiddly adjusters, winding them all the way down, and on go the cables. I actually noticed on that pivot point for the brake, the quick release, there was some actual original packaging on there which we actually peeled off. It was just like a blue film plastic to protect it from the factory that had never been removed from when the bike was very first built. So we also did that little detail, and we're just beginning to get the cable guides back on. You can see the gloss of that carbon there now. It's looking really nice. So fresh new cable on the derailleurs. So that was just the old cable I just peeled out there. We tend to leave odds and ends on the bike of old cabling so we know where everything went. And so it was just for all the sort of ends and guides and everything that go through that derailleur. Front one was a little trickery. It was anything that went through the frame, so we had to just use a magnet to pull that one through. Get that nice, and then in go the bearing cups, give them a little grease. We use our nice little bearing cup tool, which is absolutely no chance of this slipping off. It's a lovely tool, that one. Torque them up before the chain set goes back on. And you'll see in a moment or two we actually made one tiny mistake. Can you spot it? Have you spotted it yet? You'll see in a second, so if you can answer that in the comments and be honest whether you actually spotted it first or not. So on goes the chain set now. Everything's torqued up, so these all have their spec, and we start to get that together, torque them up. Although, like I say, I had to take that off again, but you'll see why in a moment. I mean, you can see whoever painted this was a good painter. It's a lovely gloss finish on that. You know, it's fair play to him there. And it certainly picked a good painter for this job. It came back really nice. Torque everything up, and then here comes the. Oh, hang on, we've got to get the cable in there first. So we line up front derailleur, and we had to take the chain set off because we'd forgot this chain guard. So we re-glued this on, set everything back up again, and then on goes the chain. The chain we degreased along with the cassette and all the pulley wheels and everything, so it's all fresh. Goes back together. So this was the original chain, but cleaned up. And then once that's on, we index the rear derailleur, set up the front derailleur, make sure everything is changing perfectly, and then once we're not happy that it's all changing perfectly, then we torque up the pinch bolts. Tend not to do that until everything's right. On go the cable ends, again torque up the front one, and yeah, you can see it's really almost there now. And then we just remove accessory bolts, replace our bolts with the originals, and it's beginning to look lovely. And I mean, this is a day's work, you know, stripping the bike down, rebuilding it all, setting it all up. You know, it's a good full day's work to do this, so it's quite time consuming. But when you see the end results of a bike that the customer's painted, they just look fantastic. So we've now squared up the handlebars. The final thing is to torque up those stem bolts, and that bike is now almost ready to ride. I also pumped the tyres up. These tyres weren't very inflated. And you can see that dull matte finish to this lovely glossy with the carbon really popping out at you. These before and after shots really show what an improvement this paint lacquer made to this bike. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe.